welcome to the Retainers for Life webinar. I am Lorraine Porto. I'm the COO over here at Retainers for Life. And from day one, I always try to put high value, very interesting guests on the webinar. That's what's kept you coming back to us month after month. And today is no exception to that rule. I met Dr. Michael DeLuc probably I'm going to say approximately about 2 years ago. And Dr. DeLuc came on board as a Retainers for Life doctor. And at the time, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, please do, you were a practicing orthodontist, but
Yep,
today you're not.
correct.
And I think that for me is a really interesting story about how this happened. And I want you to tell us all about it. So welcome so much, Dr. DeLuc. So much appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you so much, Lorraine, for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I've enjoyed our conversations over the past couple of years and enjoyed working with Retainers for Life very much. So I'm looking forward to speaking with you more about Doc today.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And of course, I would always love to dive down the rabbit hole of Retainers for Life, but we're not going to do that today because today is about you.
Well,
Now,
thank you.
for people that are watching, and I think always when I'm watching a webinar, I have a tendency to sort of Google while I'm doing it. So your website is www.theorthocoach.com.
Correct. Yep.
So for anybody that's interested in doing a quick Google and looking through your website, do it because it'll help clarify sort of where you came from and where you're going. And so I'm going to ask you what inspired you to become an orthodontic coach. And I'm excited to hear how that happened.
So I've always been involved in teaching education side of dentistry and orthodontics ever since I started practicing in the early 2000s. I was a faculty member at multiple hospitals, teaching orthodontic residents, teaching general practice residents in a general practice residency on a cleft craniofacial team. So the educational side of things is something I've been extremely passionate about. When I was a full-time clinician, I started my own practice in 2005 from nothing, right out of my residency, built it up from scratch, ran it myself with my wife as helping in the background as a solo doc practice until just this past year. Along that journey, I always knew there was something burning inside of me to want to teach on a bigger scale. And so I did it, as I said, kind of a part-time, once or twice a month at different clinics and hospitals where I was on faculty. But I knew I wanted to devote more time and energy to it kind of in the second half of my career. And that's where I really ultimately got to the point where, as I was approaching kind of 20 years into private practice, I said, this is the time to do it. It's now or never. And that's where I decided to head in this direction. Was
there like a turning point where you were like, I'm going to leave that? Like, was there a moment in time where you said, this is it? Was there something specific that happened? Or was this more of, it was a desire from day one?
So yes, there was kind of a climax point where I said, okay, this is going to be the time. And a lot of that, as with a lot of people in a lot of different industries throughout the world, COVID, the shutdown was kind of a point at which I stopped and caught my breath a little bit. As the docs out there know, when you're in private practice and you're going along, and I was very fortunate and thankful to have built a very busy and successful private practice. You're going 100 miles an hour, and it's hard to really get perspective on kind of where you are in your journey at that point. I had all these goals of what I wanted to do and in my practice, and I had achieved them. But then you get to that pinnacle and you're saying, okay, I have some other goals of things, and how am I going to do those too? And so COVID gave me a little bit of time for the first time to kind of step back, take a breath and say, like, okay, how am I going to execute this next half of my career? And can I do it in practice? So I tried to bring in an associate for a few years. Chris Benson and Doug Coppola valued my practice. And I had a guy, I actually hired him in mid 2019. Didn't work out. I had to let him go after just a few weeks. So I had really gotten to the point where I had exhausted a lot of options, and I was in upstate New York in an area where there just really aren't orthodontists appearing all the time. And so Chris Benson actually said that when he had looked at my practice, and he said, you put this practice in the South, you're going to have a line a mile long of
Yeah.
docs that want to come work for you. He's like, but in Schenectady, New York, he's like, might be a little bit of a tough sell. So he was right, as he obviously knows the industry very well.
Right.
And yeah, seriously, I mean, he was prophetic in that. I remember right where my wife and I were standing when he said that. And it just didn't work out with the guy that I brought in for various reasons. And that was a moment where I kind of said, so that's mid 2019, where I kind of said, okay, I've just tried for like 3.5 years to bring someone in. I didn't want to just bring anyone in. I had a tremendous relationship with my patients. So I was proud to have built a really good reputation in my community. And I didn't want to just bring someone in just to bring someone in. I really wanted to bring someone in that would be able to, we'd keep the patient volume the same. I would decrease the number of patients I was seeing. He or she would increase their volume, and I would be able to use that extra time to go out and teach. So that was really my plan.
It was a good plan.
Yeah. I mean, on paper, it was great. It was looking great. And when that didn't work out, I got to the point where I said, well, I can just kind of keep, after that failed in 2019 and didn't work out, started having to think about, well, what am I going to do here? I can't just keep trying to find associates. I can't just bring someone else in right away. It's not that easy to find someone up there, as I said. And then COVID hit. And I said, okay, I really got to think about this. My vision is not to practice another 20 years in the capacity I am right now. As much as I loved what I did clinically and I was extremely passionate about it, I really had this burning desire to go out and be in the coaching and consulting side. And with my personality, I knew because I'm an all-in type of person, I wasn't going to be successful at trying to balance both. And how do I scale the practice down? It's going booming. What do you do? Just start telling certain patients you're not going to bring them in? It's a very hard thing to do. It sounds easy, but to implement something like that, and trust me, I thought about it, didn't make sense. So I said, and I got offers from corporates to sell my practice for a lot. And I turned it down because I was confident if they couldn't, I have nothing wrong with the corporate model. I get why people do it. I'm not disparaging it in any way. For me, however, I knew the trouble that all the colleagues in that area were having finding a doctor. I wasn't alone in this. The number of orthodontists in that community were shrinking considerably. And I said, if I can't find someone, then corporate's going to come in. They're just going to put someone here that my patients may or may not do the best for my patients. And I couldn't live with that. So I said, I own my building, I own all my assets, had no debt on any of it. And I said, I'm going to sell those assets off and phase down my practice. And it's a very unconventional approach, but I literally did that.
Very unconventional.
Yeah, I literally phased it down. I finished every single case I started with my own two hands. And everybody else that was on observation or in between phases, we helped transition to a new provider and slowed it down. And as I was slowing it down, I started building up this concept.
And I'm going to ask sort of that question that we talked about earlier before we came on camera, which is there any questions that I'm not allowed to ask? Because I know everybody's thinking this, especially all the women in the industry, is like, what was your wife thinking through all of this? Because that's a big change, right? You moved from Schenectady to Florida, right? So you had a big change in not only in your career, but for your entire family. So I know everybody's thinking this and they want me to ask. So what was your wife thinking through all of this?
So she was obviously intimately involved in the practice. She was right there through it. She knew she literally ran the front and is amazing at building systems. I mean, Chris Benson was like, whoa. I mean, it's like this place really, I mean, it has a lot of efficiencies, and that's actually what, hopefully we'll get to some of the things Doc will do down the road. And I'm anxiously trying to pull her into that a little bit. She's liking being a mom now, but once the kids are out of the house, so she has a real talent for that. Her background's as an occupational therapist. So she really understood how the practice ran and the challenges we were facing. And so she saw the toll that was taking on me as well, being a solo doc. I mean, when Chris came in, Chris literally stood there and said, I don't know how you're doing the numbers you're doing.
What you're doing.
Yeah. He's like, you are doing the work of 2.5 to 3 orthodontists yourself. He's like, and he actually said, and I don't mean this in a arrogant way at all. He said, I see one practice like this every 5 years. So, and I think he said he's seen probably less than 10 in his whole career that were running the way my practice was. So I'm very proud of that. At the same time, it was not easy to run to run it like that. And it took a lot out of me. And
I think someone else speaking those words out loud is like, oh, I was thinking it, and then someone else says, and you're like,
yes,
mm.
so true.
Right?
So true. It
Yeah.
reaffirms that voice in your head that's kind of
Yes.
sitting there. And so Renee could see the toll it's taking on me, my wife. And so we talked a lot about it, and kind of when this didn't work out with the associate, and when then the COVID shutdown happened, we literally talked about it and talked about our vision for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years and
Yes.
what we wanted that to look like, and made the cumulative decision that together that
Yes.
going on the path that we was not going to be the best thing for our family, for our health, based on how much it was taking out of us to run it at that level. And that's where I was saying the
Yeah.
discussions came of, do we just kind of slow it down a little bit? Because I really wasn't willing to compromise and just bring a doctor. Colleagues were like, just bring someone in. I was like, I know that would be the smart thing to do in a lot of ways. At the same time, my patients, I had that old school special relationship with them.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to betray that. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying others who are doing that. It's just in my
Right.
particular situation, I knew I wouldn't. I tried for 4 years. I was like, I could just keep trying forever, or we can make a decision. So she was very helpful in all of that, and very encouraging. And
Well,
we
I
made
think
it.
that that speaks volumes to you and the relationship that you have with your wife and your
Mhm.
family,
Yeah.
and the confidence that they have in you also.
Yeah.
So that speaks volumes to you, and certainly anybody that is interested in coming and working with you. I think that's important to know.
Thank you.
Was there a moment where you understood the role that you were going to play on the coaching side? So you know that I live in the world of startups.
Mhm.
I love the book, and I brought it out just so that I could bring it on, The
Yep.
Blue Ocean,
Yep.
right? I
Absolutely.
love
Yep.
this book.
Yep.
I ultimately, how I evaluate and which startups I work with is whether or not there's 10,000 of that out there
Yeah.
already. If it's another aligner company, it probably just wouldn't interest me. But if it's a business model that hasn't been done before,
Yep.
and it is a missing piece of the industry, I'm all in. I mean, no
Mhm.
matter how hard it might be and how no one's heard of it before, if you
Sure.
see something that's broken in the industry or missing, or just like a notch that's not filled,
Yeah.
um, is what was what well, how did Duluth orthodontic coaching like come together as a platform, right? Come together as this is what the model's going to look like.
So it's kind of a multifaceted answer, but I'll take it to kind of the overall genesis of the idea. And that was, as I was practicing, I developed some really cool techniques to address certain issues in patients, namely airway and crowding and transverse discrepancies in younger patients, pre-adolescent, early mixed dentition. And so I was always passionate about intercepting early. I always felt that I could do a lot young when the kids were very pliable, but no one likes having expanders crammed in their mouths. And it's kind of a whole thing that orthodontists, I tend to think, shy away from a lot of times, because what we think of for early treatment, headgear, lip bumpers, expanders, I mean, no one on the clinical side administering the care, and on the patient side and parent side receiving the care, like them. So I think we kind of just default to try to almost step away from it and say, well, we don't really need a lot of interceptive treatment. We can do it later, because we don't really like doing interceptive treatment. So I had developed some ways to do it, which were very minimally invasive, very effective, and really just essentially using braces and wires on these kids at 6, 7 years old. And I have had an article in
Crazy.
OrthoTown that came out in June. I have part 2 coming out in November, which goes into this in much more detail and talks about the science behind it, the literature behind it, and how I extrapolated that to apply to the way the techniques I developed. So I would go to meetings and I talk to colleagues that I did my residency with, and I would chat with some people, and a lot of people didn't want to hear it, but some did. And so I would just kind of coach them. I would just tell them, hey, I'll hop on some calls with you. I'll tell you what I'm doing, and you're going to think I'm crazy, but just hear me out. And some of them started to do it. And then they told me what it did for their practice. And they told me what it did for how much they were able to change lives and notice things in young kids when it came to airway and transverse discrepancies that they had never seen before.
Yeah.
It wasn't even on their radar. And I then realized that through my educational involvement, that the residency programs in dental schools are not teaching this. So there's this big void of knowledge
That is so interesting.
where
Yes.
people are looking at me like, I never have even heard of this. To that point, I'm on faculty now at a residency in Fort Lauderdale at NSU. And when I talk to the residents about this stuff, and it's a great program, residents are super intelligent, great group of kids. They have not heard any of it. They've never even heard about airway. They've never heard about analyzing cone beams for airway. So I was putting all that together and realizing there's such a paucity of knowledge when it comes to the airway and the involvement of breathing on the development of the craniofacial complex. And the orthodontist is the foremost expert on craniofacial growth and development, yet we're not doing this. And further, the GPs and pediatric dentists get it. They see this more than even the orthodontists do.
Yes.
And I was just saying, there's a need for somebody to go out there. The problem is it's not the most popular stance to take. And when you start to talk about this, people turn off real quick. And so in my podcast and different things, I actually recorded a podcast this morning with a general practitioner where we were talking about why is that, right? So there's a lot of reasons, and I won't go into them here, but the point is it's kind of a hot button issue, to say the
Yes.
least. And I think people are scared to talk about it because it just can get a lot of blowback. I happen to be the type of person that doesn't bother me. I kind of welcome that heat. I thrive on it. And I felt that, especially by stepping away from a clinical practice, I could really devote the time and energy required to go all in on this. And that's what it takes. It takes going all in. If I was still practicing part-time, you kind of have 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and you're worried like, well, is this going to affect my practice? If people in the orthodontic community don't like what I'm saying, I don't have to worry about that. I have all the data to back it up. I've got all the cases. I've got all the serial time point cone beam images. Now I can just teach it. So that's kind of the genesis of it. And then it's evolved to now get into other arenas. Like for my podcast, I have a multi-part series with my accountant. I have one coming up with my financial advisor. I've had other guests on in other arenas. So it's become a much more broad mission. I've now developed it into where I do one-on-one coaching with docs who take my CE courses. So I became an ADA CERP recognized provider, and I built a really robust continuing ed platform on my website. And so as follow-up, a lot of docs will do coaching with me. So it's primarily right now in the arena of that interceptive treatment airway, but I'm building something to get into a lot more clinical expertise in other arenas. That won't be all I'm talking about all the time. It's just because that was my passion. And I had to finish that. I had so many colleagues say to me, you literally, and my final thing I'll say on the cleft craniofacial team, the head surgeon and the head ENT, I started doing this on patients with craniofacial anomalies, and the head surgeon and the ENT literally, Shun Adateo and Jason Mouzakis, and they'll be coming up on the podcast in the near future. We're like, Mike, you need to go teach this.
Yes.
Hard stop. They're like,
yes.
And I just kept saying to them, I don't have time. Like, that's all great. And they would say, you will change the way we approach cleft craniofacial care. Like they saw what was happening in these patients. They saw how much easier the surgeries were getting. The ENT saw what it was doing for these airways. And he's going, they're all just, they would call residents over, no joke, in our rounds. And they'd be like, you need to look at what Dr. DeLuke is doing.
Yeah.
So those things really motivated me. And it just was always in the back of my head. And then I said, when the rest of it came into play, I said, this is the time.
So that became sort of the platform for you to build from. And I think, well, first of all, that's amazing. I'm excited to hear, because ultimately what I did for 32 years in sort of the corporate side of orthodontics, I worked for a German company, and a lot of what I did was work with their orthodontic inventors. And someone so would look and say, what's in place right now from an appliance perspective doesn't do the A, B, and C that I need it to do. And I've come up with a new invention that does A, B, and C. What's really interesting about what you have done is you haven't reinvented the wheel, is that you have discovered that the tools that we have sitting chair side can solve problems that we didn't even know we could.
Well said.
And I'm sure there's more to it. I'm not on the clinical side, and I'm sure there's more to it, but it's not this sort of brand new appliance. Am I correct?
No,
that, it is literally brackets and wires, right?
You are 110% correct. It almost sounds too easy to be true. And it really is. When you stop and think, why do we learn as orthodontists that you can't do that? Right. It's just being dogmatic. We're just taught you just don't use braces. But if you go back in these young patients, if you go back in the literature in the early 1900s, there were people who published Bogue. I think his article was 1913 in or his textbook. It was like on orthodontia or on the orthodontic dentition, whatever it was. They were talking about in the primary dentition helping develop arches to minimize the problems later. So this isn't a new concept, but we've gone
a lot from like the development of products that it just veered somewhere along the way.
Yes.
And it could have been corporate America made that happen, right? It could have been marketing, a new appliance that someone thought of, and before you knew it, they had more money than whoever wrote the original article. And before you knew it, just mindset was changed. And I think it's pretty amazing that you're willing to sort of step out of your comfort zone and everybody else's comfort zone just to have a conversation about it. I think, you know, I admire that in you, and I say I'll cheer you on and making sure that you move that forward, because that's pretty exciting. But I was also on your website and you told a story, and if anybody's on the website right now, just click on the first video. But the first story, and I would love for you just to tell it here, because I think ultimately when you have these experiences, that it's sort of like that light bulb goes off over your head. You're like, aha moment. And that was the patient that had, correct me if I'm wrong, if they had autism. Does that correct?
Asperger's, yes, but on the spectrum,
Yes.
So early on, when what was happening, kind of when I started practice, I came out and we were trained. UConn's an amazing program, but it was kind of a more traditional training, which is still in most residencies what's going on today. And we didn't talk about airway, and cone beam, in fairness, really was like just coming out, and they weren't taking these things on kids, and it was higher radiation. So it really wasn't on our radar, even though, ironically, airway's been talked about in our profession. If you go back in the literature, literally till the early 1900s as well. That's nothing new, even though we act like it is. But I always had this sense that if I could get in there early, I could prevent a lot of problems from developing. So, but I was doing it with expanders, turnkey expanders. And as I said before, it's not easy to do on a lot of these kids. I mean, even kids who don't have any behavioral challenges, it's just, you're taking a 6-7-year-old kid and putting an upper and lower, big expander in, and the lower, it's just hard. And they don't have enough room for their tongue anyway. And now there's this, they can't speak well, they can't eat. So I was just kind of trying to, orthodontists, a lot of us are kind of tinkerers anyway, and we're thinkers, and we like to try to find new ways to do things. So it was always bothering me that I couldn't figure out a better way to do this. So I had a patient, one in particular, and ended up being a couple within a period of time, that I talked to the parent. They were very narrow, they had significant crowding, and it was really either we have to start removing tooth mass and extracting teeth, or if a patient didn't have Asperger's and could have tolerated expanders, I would have done that. And the parents said, Dr. Mike, like, he has to be put to sleep for any extractions. How many times is he gonna need teeth out? I'm like, it's gonna be a couple, it's like probably 2 or 3 times. Like, is there anything you can do, anything to avoid him getting these teeth pulled? So I said to them, I said, well, because we agreed he would not. They said, he'll rip the expanders right out. He was very sensory with his tongue. And they said, once his tongue hits those, it's not gonna happen. So I said, okay, well, I said, you think he could tolerate braces? They really don't bother the tongue at all. They just be on the outside. And the patient was there, and we kind of talked about it, and he seemed okay with the thought. And I said, we can give him like a mild oral sedative to get him up to, make sure he's relaxed that day. We'd really honed in, how our behavior management for our patients. And the parents said, let's try it. And I said, just so you know, I even had it in informed consent. I said, this may not work. Like, it might not, it won't hurt. It's not going to hurt anything, but it might not work. I said, if it doesn't, you got to agree with me that we're going to have to take teeth out. And they said, we get it. We're on board, but let's try it. So I did. And I got braces on him. And Lorraine, I can still picture, this is at this point 12 plus years ago, I can still see his arches when he came back that first visit at 8 weeks.
And your eyes were like,
what the heck just happened? I'm like, this
Yeah,
isn't supposed to happen. Like
yeah, yeah,
this
yeah,
isn't supposed to happen.
yeah,
And I started to see this. And then so I started doing this in other patients and applying it, to more and more patients. And so much with so much apprehension initially that for like 2 years, I told, it was in our informed consent, like, you still may need expanders. This may not work. I mean, it was to the point I didn't just go in and this was everything I was doing. I treaded lightly, and it was a transition into it. And then as I got a couple years in and I started seeing that it just worked all the time, I started saying, oh my gosh, this is just my new protocol. And then we brought it to the cleft craniofacial population.
yeah.
And then from there, it just grew. But yeah, that was kind of how the whole thing started.
I think that's so incredible. And when I watched the video, that's just how everybody's feeling right now is how I felt.
Mm,
It's an incredible feeling. And sometimes there's that moment in time where you look back and you realize there was a sequence of events that were put in front of
mm,
you, and you weren't making any kind of sort of conscious decision, right? That it
true.
just was in front of you to solve, in
Yeah.
front of you to solve, and before you knew it, you had an epiphany.
Yeah.
And it was, many times in the, I mean, certainly my experience to come on board with Retainers for Life was similar. It was similar, certainly not as inspirational, but it was a similar sequence of events that brought me here. That's like sort of where I'm meant to be.
Yeah.
And I'm getting that feeling from you. This is what you're meant to do,
Yeah.
and you're meant
I
to do
agree.
great things with it. So that's pretty exciting.
And
So yeah,
on that note, if I could,
yes,
on one of the things that is kind of removed this far from it, and I think this gets into why some docs aren't as willing to do this. It speaking about it reflectively, you can say, oh, and we just kind of started placing these braces, but there's a whole change that has to happen to your practice to do this. You have to train your team differently, everything from your treatment coordinators to your patient coordinators to your clinical assistants. You have to change your scheduling systems. You have to change how you approach patient care. Putting braces, full braces on a 6, 7, 8 year old is different than putting them on a 14-year-old. So all of those things took a lot of time and energy. And that's what in my courses online,
yeah,
I literally teach all of that. I go from A to Z, from the initial diagnostics, even to the phone call when the parent calls, all the way up to phase 1 retention, because it is a journey. And I think if people just go in there and throw a bunch of braces on a 6 or
right,
7-year-old, they're going to have an experience that's not ideal. Number one, how do you even get the braces to really fit to these teeth? And they're not meant to
right,
fit the baby teeth. And there's just a lot of logistical challenges. And I think that's part of the obstacle for people is they just, again, as orthodontists, we're ritualistic, we're in these patterns, myself included, and to all of a sudden stop the way you're doing it,
right.
transform your schedule, everything. I mean,
Yes,
you no longer, it's a great thing, but you no longer need appointments for separators, or not as many, very few, for band fitting and all of the insertion of appliances and RPE checks. Like, not that I never use expanders anymore, but rarely. So, I use them in older kids, obviously, of course you still need to,
yeah,
but you didn't have all these phase 1s and expanders anymore. So that logistical challenge, I think, is an obstacle for a lot of people, but I'm
yes.
out there now because I saw what happened when I walked some of my friends and colleagues through it and how they were able to implement it and how successful they became doing it. And that's what I want to be able to do for everybody.
And I love the idea that it is sort of it's turnkey in the sense that you know what you need to do from soup to nuts, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just I just tell you. And many times on the corporate side, I feel like I'm really bashing the corporate side. On the corporate side, they'll tell you this is how you use the appliance, but they don't think before and after, right?
Yes.
So it's like
Yes.
here's
Yep.
the appliance
Yep.
and here's the user manual,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So I'm very interested in that you take it from soup to nuts. And but even just sort of stepping away from that, you also talk about and what I think about what you're saying is that there's more to this than just coaching, because I saw that you have a community on your website.
Yep.
And the idea, and certainly even just from my perspective, when I was talking to the CEO of one of the top tier labs, and I was telling him, just sharing with him some of the decisions that I had to make, and he was going, listen, Lorraine, like you're just overthinking it.
Mm.
It's um you need to think about it this way and not think about it that way. And just having someone that's sort of been there, done that,
Mm-hmm.
in your corner saying, it's okay, like make a decision.
Yep.
And the idea that you sort of lived and breathed this already,
Yep.
never mind that you now have teaching courses, right? You have courses that teach it
Mhm.
from A to Z, is that you have a community where you're able to discuss it, right?
Yes.
So I have this person that is sort of can lean on a little bit, and
Yep.
that's you. And I
Yep.
think that that's very powerful in our industry. So tell me more about your community and how that's coming along.
It's a great point. And so the community kind of has two parts. There's the coaching side where I do one-on-one direct coaching with colleagues. They can book sessions with me online and they're virtual and they can upload their records. And it's a whole process where we can
Yep.
interact over cases. So I have had some great coaching sessions where exactly what you said. They've taken my courses. They've started trying to do this in their practice. They have some questions and I'm there for them. So they can enroll in a coaching session. They go online, enroll, it's linked up to my schedule. They book it when it works for them and their schedule. And it goes through the instructions of how they would, what they should upload. I review their case ahead of time. So I'm prepared for it. And we go in and we just talk about it. And I had a recent coaching session, which just actually was, I guess it was Monday. It was very recent. It was only a few days ago, but I had a recent coaching session and it was great. I mean, they had a few cases for me and they had never really looked at cone beams for the airway.
Mhm.
And so they had a cone beam. They understood it, the sort of, looking at adenoids and some of the bigger anatomy that you would see that could be an issue, but they had never really, as I teach people, take the tour of the airway, looking at the nasal passageways and looking at any impediment to airflow and the tongue position and all of that. And seeing their excitement was so exciting for me because I could see in them as they're getting it, that moment they're going, oh my gosh, that makes sense. That's why. And I said, when you call that mom up now and tell her you were re-reviewing the case, the patient needs to go see the allergist. I said, and they get to the allergist and get the help they need, and it starts to change this girl's
Oh,
life. And then you're
yes.
doing what you're doing clinically to help her grow with just braces and wires.
Right.
You are going to transform this girl's life and you become the hero to these patients and
Yes.
their families. And I know that's where it's going to be. I know it because I've just
Yes.
seen it happen and play out, not only in my own practice, but in people I've coached. So that community aspect is me trying to do exactly what you said and not just give them like, okay, here's some courses, take these, figure it out, but be there to guide them
Yes.
along and help them literally with their cases. And I can do a screen share. So I'm looking at what they're looking at and we bounce ideas back and forth. And it's been really great. I have doctors who I coach, they just literally just want me to review some cases too. And it doesn't have anything
Yes.
to do with the phase one stuff. They just want another set of eyes and ears on a case and they want my
Yeah.
opinion. And that's great too. But
Yeah.
helping provide a supplement to the continuing education portion has been great. And then the
Yeah.
other part, the locals community, is something that is what's kind of more of a what's coming. I'm trying to build a little bit more of an interaction community. I have shied away from developing a Facebook group for this because I just feel like, number one, it's not really a blue ocean. It's there's a lot there already, and it just
Yeah.
doesn't really bring out, I don't think, people's, it's not necessarily the safest environment for people to talk about what they're really thinking or feeling because people just attack. So
Yes.
I'm working on building a community. It's not totally 100% established yet, but it's in the works to have a place where we can have academic discussions about amongst a bigger group, not just the one-on-one coaching, but a bigger group of colleagues where I could have maybe a speaker and we could then, or go over a lit review on a paper talking about some of this stuff, and then we can brainstorm and talk about it professionally as colleagues and
Yeah.
not a one-off attacks just on people in a sort of social media, traditional social media
Yes.
way.
And
So
I find that too, sort of those like keyboard warriors that'll just sort of
yeah,
just sort of vomit onto their keyboards,
yeah,
and Lord knows what comes out.
yeah,
And I'm very careful about that also. I like to hold people responsible, to act appropriately. And
yep.
when they don't, just make sure there's very clear boundaries in place about what's expected. I know that you work a lot in podcasts. We do this also here at Retainers for Life. It's a great way for people out in the orthodontic industry to learn who we are as individuals, because
Mhm.
we're individuals, we're humans, and we're very excited about our industry and we love our industry. So tell me more about your podcast, because I know you've been working on that a lot.
Yeah, the podcast I've really been enjoying it. It's kind of funny. We were talking before about my wife Renee and her role in the transition out of private practice to this side of things, and how supportive she was with it. She said from a while ago, she's like, "You need to do a podcast." It's probably going back like a year and a half ago, and I'm like,
Knows you so well.
yeah, right. And she knows a lot to talk, and I really enjoy the human interaction and that face to face of idea sharing and exploring different things. And so I said, okay. And I really, at that point, I mean, I didn't listen to a ton of podcasts and I really wasn't that well versed in it. So she was listening to more. So I just started listening to some podcasts and just trying to get a feel for how they even worked, how I would do it. And as I was listening to some, I started thinking, oh, I could do this. I like this. I like what this could bring out, and the interaction with colleagues and other professionals and people in the industry or even not in the industry that could help ultimately my mission, which is to improve the quality of life and allow my colleagues to live more prosperous lives. So I started thinking about and just making a list of all the different things that I could talk about and the people with whom I could speak. And it started getting really long. And I'm going, well, there's some content here. And then you start thinking about one person. I'm thinking, well, maybe this person too. So when Doc kind of launched and the podcast launched in June of 2023, I had already a good idea of the people I was going to kind of start with, and Dr. Amy from Retainers for Life being one of the earlier ones that I wanted to speak with. And she was awesome. And it was just early on, I started to say, well, I guess I should back up. I started to create just a little bit of my own content first. That wasn't even really interviews. I just started creating some motivation, like on the Motivational Mondays, where I'd give like a 10-minute motivational talk about some of the things that could help everybody just have a little more upbeat attitude towards certain challenging circumstances and situations. And then I started putting out some of my content about cone beams, right? I did like an hour on just talking about the value of a cone beam. And then I started doing some of my phase one stuff, a part one, part two, just a broad overview of what I was talking about. And then I started with interviews. And the first interview was a buddy of mine, Dr. Jeff Rothenberg, who's in Aventura, Florida. One of the people I was referencing before when I said a co-resident of mine from years past, and who I had many years prior, talked to him about this phase one approach I was taking. And it was awesome. I suggest everybody listen to it. Jeff is great. And he talks about what it did for his practice and his patients and the way it transformed how he views patients and the reputation it built in his community. And it was really cool. And so with that first one, I mean, I was hooked. I'm like, I love this. And so I learned YouTube's great that way, how to edit and figure out how to, so I started doing sound overlays and editing, and I actually really enjoy it.
Fancy.
Yeah. I'm like, this is fun. So then we kind of built a little podcast studio here in our house down in Florida. So it all just started to come together, and now I'm having so much fun with it. I have an interview coming up with the AAO president, Dr. Guyman, coming up.
That's amazing.
Recording that tomorrow. I've got all sorts of, like I said, between accountants and attorneys, and just a lot of information that I really want to just help, not even just orthodontists, but dentists in general. And so it's really evolved into a broader scope than I maybe even had initially anticipated. And I'm loving it. I think I'm booked on episode releases through up to like Christmas at this point. So we're in mid-October here. So it's definitely it's taken off pretty quickly.
Well, I can understand that. So my original idea was with the Retainers for Life webinar was, we would bring guests on, they would be able to talk about what most inspires them. And what I came to understand was that it's a little bit bigger than that, that it is a support system within the industry. It's letting that knowledge get out there in a very natural human way. So that this is something that I really believe. I've been in the orthodontic industry for 32 years, and it had been very cold and disconnected, both sides of the industry, the corporate side and the clinical side. And I've suddenly started to see this sort of melding, where it's like we can if we just open our ears, we can learn from each other. And this has been very, very interesting for me to watch, considering I started out so long ago. And so this webinar series that we started out very just basic, getting just really interesting people on board. And recently, I bumped into a young lady from the UK, and she is an entrepreneurial spirit. and, being a woman in business, and being someone, I love to see bravery, where somebody stands up and goes, look, I have a great idea, which is why, Dr. Jackson inspires me so much, is she
Yeah.
saw something that was broken inside her industry, in her opinion, and in mine too,
Yep.
right? It was something that just doesn't work great, and she had a solution for it.
Yep.
And that really inspires me. So this young lady in the UK, and it's coming, right, is she is with a company. She's started a company called curlid.com. And you're thinking, what is that all about, Lorraine? And it's about this young lady that has really curly hair. And if you're a woman, and there's lots of women watching this, they're a hassle to deal with. You men don't know, you have it so easy, right? You don't know
Yes.
what I'm talking about.
Nope. Nope.
And so what she does is she takes samples from your hair, right? And you send it into this company in the UK. And I'm originally from Ireland, so I'm still living that world quite a bit. And she does an analysis of your hair, and she does it scientifically, and
Okay.
then recommends products. So they're
Gosh,
not
wow. How
proprietary
cool.
products. So us women, we spend so much money on hair products
Right. To
as
find
women,
that right product,
right?
having daughters and wife,
Yes.
sisters. Yeah. That part
and
I
and
appreciate.
and she has this company that says, look, use this comb, this brush, this towel, these products, right?
Wow.
And you won't believe it, but I have really curly hair. So this is where I got into this,
Wow.
right? And what excited me about the webinar that we're doing is I can bring someone in like Rachel, right, from Curl ID, and talk to, especially us women here in the industry that are putting our hair up on ponytails every day, that have very stressful jobs, right?
Mhm.
That maybe have had cancer and lost all their hair, and their hair has grown back. They are postpartum, they
Mhm.
are postmenopausal. I
Mhm.
mean, there's all these reasons on why us women in the industry lose our hair, right?
Yep.
Or we have problems with our hair. So this is what your excitement, obviously, is maybe a little different of a topic, but your excitement in your podcasts is how I feel about our podcast, is that we can broaden it quite extensively, right? And
Right.
talk about really interesting topics, and be a value add that comes across our doctors' desks,
Yes.
right? We're
Yep.
not always just saying, buy me, buy me, buy me.
Right. Or
It is,
teeth, teeth,
look,
teeth, you know.
exactly,
Yep.
exactly, that we can be something more powerful in the industry, that we're humans, that we are excited about our industry, and we care about our industry. So I'm with you with the podcast. I think they're
Yeah.
very exciting. For me personally, I hate to be on camera. This
Really?
is this has been my New Year's resolution, just
Oh
for
no,
me
you're
to get
great
on
at
camera. I have to, my heart palpitates for like 4 hours before I sit down
it.
to talk to you. So this is, for me, this is a challenge. This is I can speak to
Good for you.
anybody one-on-one, but you
Mhm.
put me in front of a camera, and monkey brain, as Dino calls it, Dino Watts
Okay.
calls it, kicks in. So I'm excited about your podcast. I'm excited about our podcast. So I think we should just keep doing it.
I completely agree. Yeah, and that's been a big reason, is to just give, you said that value add, give them something that is more, get some of the teeth stuff, and obviously with you, you
Yes,
some industry content certainly, but that gets boring. I mean, at the end of the
yes,
day, I mean, it does. It just kind of gets stale and boring. And
yes,
I'm really motivated to, and I've actually had colleagues tell some other colleagues, like, you should get into fitness, has always been a big passion of mine. Like, you should just
yes,
start like doing some of that. And I'm like thinking, I've had enough people say that to me the past 2 months. I'm thinking,
yes.
okay, well, maybe we'll try to get into some of
I
that and
think
just
you
try to,
saw that
you
question
know,
inside my head just forming, right? You just saw that happening, because, at the end of the day, and every woman that's watching this, and you can tell I've said that a lot because I love women, right? They're all, and, no one's not noticed your biceps. So let's talk about fitness. So let's talk about fitness. Let's talk about where you are with fitness in your life and the
Mhm,
role that it plays. I'm a post-menopausal woman, so fitness plays a large part in my life. I'm
mhm.
very, very motivated when it comes to sort of proactive health versus reactive health.
Mhm.
And I have a
Yep, me too.
feeling you might live in this world a little bit. So tell me
Yeah.
more about what you do.
So fitness has always been a passion. I started working out in high school and played football and baseball, and was actually a boxer in high school, and continued that a little bit on, and just always was an athlete that was competing at sports. And for me, what happened was, as I was college age and then into dental school, it became my sanity. It literally, I needed to go to the gym to stay sane. And I think it was a big secret to my success because I run pretty hot. I'm intense. I'm type A, so people couldn't tell. And so I needed a release. And
Yeah.
for me, when I didn't have sports in that competitive sense that I had when I was a little younger, but yet even the pressure is ratcheted up in dental school and the intensity, just knowing that every day I could go just blow that steam off and let it go for an hour was extremely therapeutic.
Mhm.
And then what happens to a lot of people, a lot of men, as we age, we get into our 30s and we start having a family. Our practices in this industry, but in any industry, your business, your career
Sure.
is getting very busy. It's very easy to drop off as a man. And, you don't have the strength and endurance maybe that you had in your 20s. So it's just really easy to kind of taper off. And I found that I almost needed it more because I would, now you have young kids and the practice and all these things going on. And there were times I would go to the gym at 9:30, 10 at night, just to get a half hour, 45 minutes in if I could, because I knew for my mental health and emotional mental well-being, I needed it. And in that, I got into very healthy eating, and I've had allergy problems of my own throughout my life. So I've had to kind of modify my diet in certain ways, not food allergies, but just general allergies. And I found certain things I eat and don't eat will help that. So it's really been a journey for me. And I've just been extremely passionate about it. And what's been actually pretty nice is, since I haven't been practicing and been doing this, I can really build my own schedule. And now I'm back to being able to get there like 6 days a week and have a much more control over my diet. And just, again, when you're not in the middle seeing patients, excuse me, for 10 hours a day, you have a little easier time when I'm building content proactively and writing and scheduling my meetings. So that's been nice. But yeah, it to me, and I think you're going to see more and more of this coming out. We're realizing the importance of skeletal muscle. We're realizing the importance of decreasing adiposity. And so, there's obviously the vanity side. You want to look good. At the same time, the health benefits of keeping that level of fitness and the energy that I put out in a day and what I expect myself to be able to do, I know I couldn't do it. So I found in the most stressful times when I saw a lot of friends and colleagues just kind of dropping off, that was when I would still get there. Even if I wasn't making gains, I would get there. I would just stay at that plateau, be like, at least I'm not losing. And I think that was a big help for me to even maintain. And then as I'm, excuse me, as I'm into my late 40s, you start to get to where you can now get back to sort of that shape you were in, even because I never lost it and never gave it up. I think that's a big thing. So for those younger docs listening, men and women, it just keep at it. Don't go from being super active in your 20s to as life gets hard. Trust me, I get it. I get it. It's hard. My one place I wasn't very good, and I'm much better now. And if looking back, I wasn't good enough about sleep when those years were going on. I just did. That's where everybody's got their spot where they have their sort of weak spot, and that was mine. I did not get
And do
enough
you
rest
find
during
that
those
you've
years.
figured that out now? So is there something that has helped you make that switch to making it more important in your life? Or is there something that you're doing? So for example, I started meditating at the
Mhm.
beginning of this year because
Yep.
my brain goes 100 billion miles per hour every moment, and I need it to slow it down. I could sleep just fine, but I needed to come up with moments where I needed to be like, I can be calm and I can be introspective and
Yep.
care about me and my well-being
Mhm.
rather than constantly working, right? Because that's just sort of my tendency is to do that. So
And
I
it's
started
easy
to
to do. Yeah.
meditate. Is there something in particular that sort of made that switch for you, or did you just become cognizant of the fact that it was important?
Yeah, again, back to COVID. I was able to sleep a little more, and I started realizing how different I felt. And I'm
Yeah,
going, I haven't had more than like 5, 6 hours of sleep on a weeknight in a
yeah,
while. And then all of a sudden, I'm, every night getting 7, 8 hours of sleep,
yeah,
and I just started to feel different,
yeah,
completely different. And I
yeah,
started saying, "Oh my gosh!" And Renee, my wife, she recognized people, my parents, my wife, they kind of say like, "Mike, you're not getting enough sleep." But I was healthy. I wasn't really getting sick. I was still fit,
I'm
and you think
fine.
exactly. I'm like, I'm fine,
Yeah.
but it was definitely taking a toll in ways I didn't even realize. Whether it was my mood, my temperament, my tolerance for certain levels of stress, so for sure, when I made that change during COVID, got some more rest, I noticed it. And that was that moment. I said,
COVID was such a turning point for you.
right. So
It
when
just
you,
gives you a moment in your life to sort of make a couple of switches,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And it was not anything, as you alluded to before, it wasn't anything that was right in front of me where I was consciously making these decisions. It's
Right.
just, I started realizing certain things and reevaluating, which I think a
Yes.
lot of people did during COVID. We kind of reevaluated where we were, especially people that were at that point, I was kind of my mid 40s. You're just kind of saying, okay, maybe going on this path isn't the best course. And I had been so disciplined in my diet and my workouts, but yet I was very irresponsible in my sleep hygiene, so to speak,
Right.
and not setting a good example for my kids. And so I've really worked on that the past few years, and not perfect at it, but I'm much better. And I feel the difference. That's been very helpful.
Is this something that you're carrying inside Doc? Like, is it something that is it something you talk about? Do you talk about these things and address these issues? Like, is this another one of those moments in time you've got just you've got someone's ear that you can lean on? Is it as a topic of conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in my earlier episodes, those motivational Mondays I was mentioning, I did some on these health wellness, touching on them just to kind of feel it out, see. And I got really good feedback on them. And
Yeah,
then coming up next year, I'm going to look to bring some of that into the really official podcast, get
yeah.
talking to some experts and getting some more concrete conversations going on that. Yeah.
Well, I think that this is the beginning of something amazing. And I could talk to you
Thanks.
forever because, as my mother always said, I could talk the hind leg of a horse.
Well, and
That's
I've
an
got
Irish
the
saying.
same affliction. So
But I think that I'm really hoping that this will give people a sense of who you are, because that's important. We always want to do
mhm.
business with people we like, and a little bit of a sense of what you're bringing to the industry, which I think is amazing. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
you so much
Thank you.
coming
Appreciate
here
you as well.
and just spilling the beans and sharing your love. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. I always enjoy speaking with you. And since we spoke back a couple years ago, and been fun for me to watch what Retainers for Life has done, and your
Thank you.
trajectory as a company, and you're just awesome. And I appreciate your support of Doc, and it's been fun developing this relationship, and I look forward to continuing it.
All right. Cheers. I appreciate you.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you as well. Take care, Lorraine.
Thank you guys. Over and out for now.
Bye bye.